Your passcode is confirmed. When you hear the tone, you will be the 5th person to join the meeting.
Look at how bombarded we are with electricity now. Thank you, Chief.
It's wasted.
It is. I would have brought my plug.
Welcome to our conference room, which we hope will be part of our civic education center at some point, which is still agreeing, but we're making progress on it little by little. The meeting, I'll remind you, is being webcast live and will be archived by the State Bar. And also, for the first time, we're posting this on the Texas Courts YouTube site. So, there too. David, would you call the roll?
Chief Justice Nathan Heck.
Here.
Presiding Judge Sharon Kelvin.
Here.
Carlos Avalon.
Over the bridge.
Mr. Richard Battle. Judge Gary Belair. Justice Bill Boyce.
Here.
Senator Brandon Creighton. Mr. Richard Figueroa. Judge Bill Gravel.
Here.
Ms. Allison Ho. Judge Scott Jenkins.
Here.
Ms. Ashley Johnson. Judge Kelly Moore.
Here.
Representative Andrew Murray.
Here. Here by phone.
Judge Valencia Nash.
Present.
Mr. Hank Nuss.
Here.
Judge Glenn Phillips.
Present by telephone.
Chief Justice Sherry Raddick. Judge Linda Rodriguez. Representative John Smithy. Judge Polly Spencer. And Senator Judah Saparini.
Present.
You had a chance to see the minutes. Are there any corrections or comments on the minutes of the last meeting in October? If not, without objection, they're approved. We'll go to our business. First, I'll just report briefly to you that I have tried to communicate the Council's recommendations to the legislature. I spoke about a number of them in the State of Judiciary address, including security. The court went out to Longview yesterday to hear oral arguments. We do that once in the fall, once in the spring. And I spoke with several trial judges who were gathered from the vicinity. And one of the questions they wanted to discuss with me was security and what could be done to improve security at their courthouses. Most of the judges were from smaller counties where there's no security at all. And yet there are concerns that there can be violence in cases, people just walking in off the street. So I hope we'll make some progress on that. I thank Senator Zaffarini for Senator Bill 42 and progress that we're making on it.
Which we will rename at your request.
Yeah, good. We're working on compensation, one of the council's recommendations, and we'll have maybe a couple of approaches to that after next week. We're kind of trying to put together a formula that might help make the compensation make more sense and reduce the political sensitivity of the issue at every session. So we'll see if we can make some progress on that. I mentioned access to justice in the State of the Judiciary, and the legislature continues to be very supportive of all those efforts. Very grateful. We're a little concerned that after good efforts to look at the federal budget, federal spending, may lead some to think that support for the Legal Services Corporation should be reduced, but we're trying very hard to convince policymakers that thing is very important, and still have some hope that we'll get there. We have a lot of strong support for LSC in the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives, and so I hope that will continue. We're progressing on bail reform, and I understand bills are being drafted and introduced over the legislature on that, and also fines and fees and costs. So I think I expect that we'll make some progress on that. And I mentioned mental health in the address, and I know there's some initiatives over there to follow through on some of the work that Justice Boyce has done. And then guardianships, and Senator Huffman and others, or Senator Zaffarini, are interested in expanding our pilot project and trying to make more improvements in the guardianship cases in the state. So I think the Council's recommendations were well received, and I think the legislature benefits from the work that we do on all that, so that they can begin to build on that. So the work is being reported, and I hope will be acted on in the session. We'll hear from the Texas Indigent Defense Commission. Yes, sir.
If I may, I have to say that your State of the Judiciary speech was the best speech I have ever heard at any joint session.
Thank
And
you.
I've been in the legislature 30 years. It was better than any other Chief Justice and better than any other governors. And I'll have you know that to this day, it was being discussed in the Senate, even by the Lieutenant Governor, who last week was talking about it, and he said it was the best one. And I noticed, since I was on your escort committee, I was watching it. And he was listening to every word, and I was saying, "Thank you, Lord." He was just glued to your speech. He was lucky since he was sitting next to you. But they're still talking about your speech. My niece, who's an attorney in San Antonio, said that she heard it discussed in San Antonio, and she looked it up online and listened to it.
Oh, thank you.
So it was great. I'm sure you wrote it all yourself, right?
Had a lot of help.
But it was wonderful. It was timely, it was important, and it was very, very much accepted and welcomed by the legislature. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. I will add just a personal note that I called Judge Kasurik that night to thank her for coming, and it ran through the voicemail, and so I texted her, and she texted me back later that evening and said that she appreciated being there, but one of the most important things was that her son, who was with her that night, was so moved by the attention that the legislature gave to his mom that she felt like it really helped him come to grips with this. You can imagine the emotional difficulty a teenager would have, you know, seeing his mother almost get killed. So that part was great. Thanks very much. Jim Backey, Texas Indigent Defense Commission.
I'm going to start.
All
Turn
right.
Jim.
Yes.
First, I wanted to report that we have, the governor has appointed 3 new members to the commission. Missy Madari of Corpus Christi is the presiding judge of the 5th Administrative Judicial Region and judge of the 347th District Court. She's former board member of the Corpus Christi Bar Association Board of Directors and a lifetime member of the Texas Bar Foundation. The second one is the Honorable Richard Evans of Bandera. He's the county judge of Bandera County. He's the chair of the Alamo Workforce Development Corporation, former chair and current member of the Committee of 6 and of the Alamo Area Council of Government and an Eagle Scout. And finally, Alex Bunnan of Houston is the Chief Public Defender of Harris County. He assisted in the creation of indigent defense programs in Alabama, New York, and Vermont. And those are our new members, and we welcome them. We also have put a copy of our annual report in front of everyone. Members of the commission have already seen this, but we had not brought it to the Judicial Council. So that is for you, you to peruse. And now, I'll turn it over to Jim Becky.
Thank you, Judge. Chief, members. Meredith told me I had to go to the floor. So I'll give them that later. I'll be brief, but I did want to introduce 2 of my newest staff. Scott Ehlers in the back. He's one of our policy analysts. I've had the opportunity to work with Scott for many years. He had worked for Senator Ellis for about 4 years. And matter of fact, Scott was a senior staff person with Senator Ellis when the omnibus bill changing us from task force to commission was passed. So He was a principal drafter of House Bill 1754. We weren't able to actually get the Senate bill, but we got the House bill passed on both sides. So really enjoy working with Scott. And then I also have Morgan Shell. She is a 3L at Texas Tech. They had Texas Tech, since I left, to put in place an outstanding externship program where they assign a student for an entire semester, and they'll get 12 credit hours. Unfortunately, they don't get paid, but they do get the 12 credit hours to get the students out in the field, get a taste of kind of real world. Morgan, outstanding talent. She's law review, great personality, and she helps me deliver on the promises I make when we're over in the Capitol, because I'll say, I'll get you this, this, and this. And so she's taking notes, and then she makes sure that I actually deliver on what I say. So I really am glad to have both of them. And as I think most everybody in here knows, we're administratively attached to the Office of Court Administration, but we're able to submit our legislative appropriation request separate and apart from OCA. And the very first session that we did it really wasn't done that well. But last session, this session, it's going exceedingly well. And the reason for that is one of the persons is in the room here, George Juke, the LBB analyst, because ultimately it's the staff when they're putting together the members' notebook. So last session and this session have gone off without a glitch, so I really want to thank our analyst who's given us outstanding support and guidance and all the preparation he puts into it. The commission is only carrying a handful of bills. One of them is, the first one is House Bill 978. Representative Murr has filed it. This was actually at the request of the governor's office. The appointees' terms on the commission were 2 years. Most of the governor's appointees through other councils and commissions, it's either 4 or 6 years. So this bill would change the terms from 2 to 6 years. Probably one of the most significant bills that we're sponsoring this session is dealing with the governance for the Regional Public Defender for capital cases. We're working with Senator Perry's office and Representative Frullo from Lubbock. And as you're aware, this is a program that serves not only Lubbock County, but 178 other counties around the state. The office has done outstanding work across the state, and this is by far the largest grant program that the commission has ever established. So one of the things the commission wanted to do was to really show the state-county collaboration. And as you may recall, last session, the legislature actually appropriated $3.1 million in general revenue for that program. And that basically covers about 25% of the cost. The commission, through its legislative appropriation request, is requesting an additional $2.9 million, which would get it up to a 50-50 state-county sharing. Another bill that commission is, we've got it back from legislation that actually hasn't been filed yet, but repeal the requirement that public defender attorneys must inform court of the results of any investigation into defendant's financial circumstances. That actually came from the Harris County Public Defender's Office, Alex Bunnan, who's now on the commission. When it was proposed, he wasn't actually on the commission. And the reason for this is, in assigned counsel programs, there is no similar requirements. So this is really just kind of equalizing it. And then the final proposal that the commission has, and Chairman Moody, one of our newest members, has already filed the bill. It's House Bill 1967, and that would create an Innocence Project grant program through the commission. Right now, we have a rider directing us to provide $100,000 to each of the 6 public law schools. In preparation of last session, the commission had commissioned a study through the Texas A&M Public Policy Research Institute to really look at the work that the projects are doing and see whether or not this is the best business model to spend state money. Well, they had a multitude of recommendations. One was dealing with the central intake, and we got the report too late to have any impact last legislative session, but at our strategic planning retreat last year now, and in preparation for this, the commission said, okay, let's go ahead and look at other successful programs from around the country. Let's look at the report's recommendations. So this is a culmination of that work and effort. We're seeking a Senate sponsor, I'm not exactly sure who we're going to have, possibly Senator Hughes, Senator Perry. We were talking with him initially since it was Senator Duncan who had originally put in place the rider, but they're really kind of at capacity. So it's like, one more, just adding one more onto the plate was probably just a little too much. So I think things are going well. Judge Keller did a great job laying out our legislative appropriation request at Senate Finance, because the commission, as you're aware, is asking for about $250 million when you total all of the exceptional items. We've got our House appropriations, the rest of the judiciary does next Thursday, so we'll be laying out again. I was very pleased at the end of the Senate Finance hearing when there was public testimony. We had 15 persons testify in support of the commission's appropriation, 7 elected officials, 3 directors from county organizations, and a handful of public advocacy groups, and that's more public testimony than we've received in the previous 3 years in just the one hearing. So the counties are really actively working this. The advocacy groups are also working it. So hopefully, even though the session we're facing whatever a $5 billion deficit, hopefully some funding for these programs can be found. And what I'd like to close on is some recent trainings that we've done, and I really want to thank Judge Gravel for his work in kind of really connecting us with the Texas Justice Center, or the Texas Justice Courts Training Center. We did a big training last month in Corpus Christi, and their general counsel, Randy Sarosity, really laid out the front end process and did exceedingly well. There was well over 100 people, judges, defense lawyers, county officials at the program, and it's literally the most meaningful relationship that we've had with the Justice Courts Training Center since we've been here. So I really appreciate Judge Gravel for kind of getting us connected with their executive director and assisting us in this training. They also assist us with one in Vernon. They're helping us in one that we're doing out in kind of Midland, Hector, sometime later this year. So, and you can see there's been a lot of press coverage on things that impact indigent defense, both state and nationally. But that concludes my report, unless anyone has any questions.
Questions of Jim? Thanks very much, Jim.
Thank you.
Good report. We'll move to the Guardianship Compliance Pilot Project. Jeff Renard, the Certification Division Director from OCA, is going to update us on that.
Good morning, Chief Justice, Judicial Council members. I'm Jeff Renard, Director for the Judicial Branch Certification Commission. I want to give you an update on our Guardianship Compliance Project. In your materials, you have additional information on the project. You also have a one-pager that lays out OCA's legislative appropriation request, except for item number 2 that would ask to expand this project statewide. So that information is in the Director report materials. The mission of the Guardianship Compliance Project is to assist the courts in protecting our most vulnerable citizens and their assets. So how do we do that? We have 4 guardianship compliance specialists, auditors that work in the field. They're going out to the counties. They're reviewing all the guardianship cases from that county that are reported to the Office of Court Administration. And in doing that, they're collecting 60 points of data. And so we have a whole bunch of data from each of the files in each of these counties that we're going out into. They're looking at the annual reports of the person for their well-being. They're looking at the annual accountings, which shows the values of the estate and what's going on in the estate. And they're reviewing the cases just to determine if they should be closed or if they're active. So we're doing a lot with these cases. In addition to reviewing the files, we're also creating a report for each of the judges on each of the cases. So there'll be a final disposition so the judge can go in and figure out which cases should be closed, which cases should be open, and then how they and recommendations on the closures and recommendations on sending out notices for the reports. So we've sent out 1,000 letters to this point in the project. So we helped develop the letter with the judge. So if there's missing annual reports, I'll talk about what's missing in just a second. But we're actually helping them develop the letters and send those letters out for the courts. This December, we were asked by the legislature to submit an annual report on the performance measure for the guardianship compliance project. We did that. At that point, we're in 11 counties. 8 of the counties we had completed fully, and we had information on them. And then the other 3 counties, Lubbock, Tom Green, and Bexar County, we were still working at the time of the report. So at the time of the report that we submitted, we have reviewed 10,300 guardianship cases to that point in all 11 counties. 7,800 of those cases were actual closures, so they weren't even active cases, but they were reporting to OCA as being active, which is a concern about our reporting. Of the 8 cases that have been completed, of the 8 counties that have been completed, 680 of the cases were found to be out of compliance. 35% of the were missing reports of the person. 46% were missing inventories, and 48% were missing annual accounting. So these reports are very important because this is the minimum compliance that the court monitors these guardianships yearly by using these reports. So the inventory gives them a baseline of what's in the estate. The annual accounting takes that baseline further from year to year to year and shows the revenue coming in, the disbursements, and making sure that nothing's being done with these cases. And then, of course, the report of the person. This is a report that just basically talks about the well-being of the person under guardianship. So this is a very important report that we've seen in almost 35% of these cases that is not being filed. I also want to just quickly talk about where we are right now. At this point, we've reviewed almost 12,300 cases as of today. We have finished Tom Green and Lubbock. That we're still working. We're still in Bexar County is reporting 8,500 cases. It's a massive caseload. We've gone through about 4,000 of those cases in Bexar County. So we're doing that Tom Green report. We're finishing up Lubbock. I'm going to meet with the county judge the first week of March to go over those findings for Lubbock. We started in Washington County this week. We're starting in Kaufman County next week, and we're starting in Beaumont and Jefferson County the following week. So we have a lot going on. We've done a lot. I think we've done a lot with a little bit with these people. We had to get them trained and on board and understanding guardianship stuff. They all have financial backgrounds, but understanding guardianship stuff was really we've gone to a lot of trainings and getting them up to speed on the estates code and how to handle these cases has been really important. So we can offer recommendations back to the courts that will work for them. A couple of other things I just want to finish with. OCA, our IT staff is working on an electronic system where guardians will be able to go in and file their inventories, annual reports, and annual accounting online. We've modeled it kind of after TurboTax, so it's kind of easy to use. It guides you through it. We expect to pilot that project in Guadalupe County and Montgomery County here in the next couple of months. So we're working feverishly on that. And also, another exciting thing we've done is recently, OCA, we've applied for a grant for the National Center for State Court to come in and assist us in preparing a guardianship training video. North Dakota did this. We're going to use what they did. So guardians will have training videos. 90% of these guardians are family member guardians who don't have any training whatsoever. So that kind of concludes my update on the guardianship compliance project. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Where's that available online to find out how to be a guardian? Is that available to the public?
To find out how to be a guardian,
Right.
you would go.
The training. She's talking about the training.
It will be available. Well, going forward, we're hoping that we'd be able to register guardians, and that training would be part of a registration for guardians.
Okay. So it's not
statewide.
available right now?
No, ma'am. We're still in the process of developing it.
We hope to get, we just applied for the grant on February 1st, and we hope to get that and then have it out later this year. Basically, it's a module-based training where people don't have to sit, for 4 hours and watch a video. It'd be basically, here you can click here on learning how to, file your annual report, and click here to learn, what you do with visiting your ward. Just sort of shows them in little snippets on how to walk through that training to do their job, basically.
It seems like you've done a lot more than you planned to do right at the beginning.
Yes, sir. David asked me to do this, and I thought it would be something simple.
You could have been Yes, sir.
When we first saw your report, we saw that the two absolutely worst courts in a category of their own were unfortunately my hometown courts, county courts of law number 1 and 2. Number 2 being 90% non-compliant, and number 1 being 88% non-compliant. The judge in county court of law number 2 has since been indicted, suspended without pay, and he has now resigned. What is the status of trying to clean up that court?
Well, as you know, we've had challenges with several of these courts, but that was one of our most challenging courts in Webb County. So what we've done is he's been removed. So county court of law number 1 judge has stepped in, and we're going to assist them in sending out the letters. What we did was, the judge did not cooperate in county court at law number 2. So what we did was, we did the project anyways. We sent him the emails, we sent him the updates, we did the letters, we did everything. And they were 90% out of compliance, but we gave them everything, they never responded back to us ever. So now, the judge from county court of law number 1 has stepped in, and he's going to take over that responsibility of getting them back into compliance.
Is the visiting judge helping at all?
I haven't been in contact with they contacted me about 2 weeks ago, and they're sending out the letters now initially. So I told them we're available to help in any way they need.
How do you deal with missing records and records that are sealed inappropriately?
We've had issues with records around, as you know, the counties all do things a little bit differently. So we have some that are very open and everything goes out there, and then we have some that are sealed and some that are redacted, and then some that you can't see any of the records relating to guardianship. So when records are missing or sealed, we ask to look at them, and we've asked for there were 2 big ones sealed in county court of law number 2 in Webb County, and we've asked that at some point we would like to go down and take a look at those sealed records.
You've made that request?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you need an order or motion, or can you just make a request?
Well, I'm going to talk to the judge first, so I can figure out how to handle it after that.
It is worth noting that the senator knows this already, but for the rest of the council, the incident that where the allegations are against the judge and what the State Commission on Judicial Conduct had listed as the violations or potential violations that the judge had were with regard to guardianship cases. And the case in particular that is an issue in the criminal case is the case that's sealed that we've not been able to see. And it was with regard to some potential kickbacks and other types of things. And so we definitely are interested in seeing that case and looking into it to see kind of if we can find any exploitation issues there. So that's the reason why we made the specific request, and we're hoping that the judge for County Court number 1 or the visiting judge will either unseal the case or give us some order or permission to actually look at it and do what the work that we've done in the rest of the cases with at least that case, but there are, as Jeff mentioned, a few more cases there that we'd also like to take a look at.
Isn't there a criminal investigation that would unveil a lot of this? And there are probably other players involved. You would think there'd be an elaborate criminal investigation.
The criminal investigation looks at the judge soliciting from an attorney in the case a loan for his staff person in return for the appointment as guardian and basically, of course, the fees that come along with that. Of course, our concern is not so much the criminal allegation, that's for law enforcement to figure out. But what we would like to do is look at what did the guardian do with the funds in that estate. It is a very, very large estate, from what we can tell. And so we would like to look and see what did the guardian do, just like we would do with any case.
I would hope to get some help from the criminal investigation, though. They might reveal some things to you. It would be helpful.
Perhaps. We'll see. We're trying.
Playing close to the vest.
This is one of the things I know Senate Bill 667, the Senators Zaffarini and 9 other co-authors.
Every member of the State Affairs Committee.
And the Senate file is giving us some additional authority that we don't currently have. Right now, we're basically asking people to let us come in, and it's upon their agreement and kind of doing it sort of as a gentleman's agreement. And this, of course, Senate Bill 667 would give us the authority to actually go in, work, have a little bit more authority to try to see some of this information. And, there's also an obligation in there that if we find a judge who, after we tell them about the issues, if they don't respond and don't engage, that it would give me as a director the authority to report that to the State Commission on Judicial Conduct.
You're seeking administrative subpoenas. Other agencies have that.
I don't think we have administrative subpoena in the bill. I don't believe it's in the bill. We've not asked for it at this point. But it's,
Will we do it?
So, the other thing I just want to point out for everyone's benefit, and I'd like to say this publicly, the introduced version of House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1 actually eliminated all funding for this program from OCA starting next year. So unless our exceptional item is restored, exception item 2, which asks for the funding, this program will go away August 31st. So obviously we're trying very hard to make the case of the importance of the program and its expansion and continuation. So just want to say that publicly. It's obviously really important. Jeff did mention this, but one of the things that we've now estimated we didn't know this before this program started, but with the information we have now, we've estimated that there is $5 billion under guardianship control in the state right now. So making sure that we're assisting the courts and overseeing that in an appropriate way is obviously a very important issue for us. And I know this council has already expressed that as an issue of concern. So just want to make sure everybody knows that the money's not in our budget. Usually money that you have in your base budget stays, but this was specifically eliminated on top of our other cuts that we were supposed to offer up. This money was taken out of our budget, so we're hopeful to get put back in.
But that wasn't across the board. It wasn't that OCA was being singled out.
I believe the direction from leadership was to eliminate any pilot project funding. So it's not that they were picking on the guardianship program. And we had three of those where they eliminated the money for projects they'd given us money for during the interim. So far all of our conversations, at the Senate Finance hearing last week, there was a great deal of support from the members of the Senate Finance Committee for this project. So obviously budgets are tight, so we don't really know exactly how that will go, but they certainly understand the need for it, and as evidenced by the number of co-authors or joint authors of Senator Zaffarini, Senate Bill 667. I think there's a lot of support. On both the House side, we've had that same conversation with members of the House. I think the support's there. It's just a matter of whether they can find enough funding to do it.
There's tremendous support, so much so that we were in line for the next bill number. All the bills are numbered chronologically, and the next number was 666. And so we don't skip numbers, and I said, I won't have it. So I went to the Secretary of the Senate, and she ordered the staff to skip a number. The next senator got 666. We got 667. We couldn't have that.
Any other questions of Jeff? Thanks very much, Jeff. That's great report. We've been trying to do pilot sites for the centers of excellence. We talked about that in the past. Scott Griffith, OCA's Director of Research and Court Services, is here to tell us about that. Scott?
Good morning, Chief and members. Got a couple things to report on this morning, starting with our work in pilot sites for our Centers of Excellence project. And those of you who have been in these meetings may remember that we've talked about this, not in our last several meetings, but we talked about it several months ago. The idea here is to create a program which is focused on performance at the trial court level, which incentivizes performance and encourages local courts to develop and pursue performance improvement plans in a way that's sustainable and in a way that really allows us, through the Research and Court Services Division, to position ourselves in a way that will be efficient and move things forward. We are in this, we're on the left side of, your left side of the screen here. The areas of performance that we're working on are areas that I think we can say within the court community are acknowledged as recognized areas of performance. Those are access to justice, case flow management, data-driven management, financial management, governance, procedural fairness, staff training and professional development, strategic thinking and planning, and information technology planning and resources. Those are 9 areas. We probably could add a 10th and maybe an 11th or 12th, but those are 9 areas that we're starting with. And so what we've done is a couple of things. We've taken these 9 areas, and I'll talk about the pilot sites in just a minute, but within each performance category, we've been working on developing specific performance benchmarks that a court would use to be able to gauge and prove, justify excellence in those particular areas. So in order to be excellent in the area of case law management, for example, there are 8 to 10, maybe a dozen things that we would suggest you need to be doing, and they need to be verifiable and measurable and that sort of thing. This is a novel way of going about this kind of work. It's a new way of going about it, not only in Texas, but generally, from what we can tell, looking at the way other states position themselves to support trial courts in this area. And the real challenge here, the real mindset here is that what we're focusing on, and this is particularly important in Texas, given the degree of how large we are, the lack of unification within the branches is particularly important. What we're focusing on here is defining the what, defining those areas of performance and what it looks like to be excellent in any of those areas, not the how. We know well, I think, that it would take an effort probably about the size of 3 OCAs to be able to develop a model that would be able to address how an individual court, an individual jurisdiction is going to pursue excellence in any of these areas. So the idea is to set out at a high level what these categories are and hopefully encourage and incentivize courts to aspire to want to be excellent in one of these areas. So our pilot work today has really been focusing on the what, not the how, but the what piece of this. And we've done a couple of things in that regard. After our June meeting, we had the opportunity to roll out the idea and to test the concept and to subject our assumptions and some kind of rough elements of the model in a couple of environments that was really helpful. We did and I want to acknowledge Bob Wessels, who I think most people in the room know for his support in this area. Bob was instrumental in getting us on the agenda for the Texas Center for the Judiciary's Professional Development Program, which is a program that some of you may know brings together court coordinators and court administrators from around the state to receive comprehensive training on trial court management and administrative issues. And so we had the opportunity to share the model and got some really good feedback from folks who were in attendance there. We've also presented the model to county and district court clerks at 2 large sessions of the Texas Association of Court Administrators this fall, to a group of JPs. And with Bob's help, and this was particularly important to us, Bob brings together twice a year county and court officials from the 5 or 6 largest counties. I think we call it, Bob is the Executive Forum for Criminal Justice Planners, is that right? Correct. So these are not only judges, but people at the county level within county government who talk about criminal justice policy and planning and resource issues and things like that. And that was, of course, very helpful because we were able to get their feedback on the model and get their input on how we might need to translate some of the concepts and terms we were using to make it meaningful to folks in county government. And one of the principal takeaways from that experience was something that Bob offered, which is this program that we're offering and framing up here gives courts a way to engage and interact with their county partners in a way that is productive, is forward-looking, is focused on improving performance rather than the kinds of interactions that put courts in the defensive and unable to justify requests for resources and that sort of thing. So we're working with 3 pilots and maybe 4. We've just been contacted by a 4th jurisdiction that's interested. One is a single district court in a jurisdiction, a large jurisdiction where there are 4 district courts altogether. A municipal court, medium size, with about 30,000 people outside of San Antonio, and then a large jurisdiction where both the district courts and the county courts are interested. And we've got, I think, about 16 or 18 courts altogether there. And what we've done is we've shared with them some of the tools that we've developed that a jurisdiction would use if they want to pursue excellence in one or more of these 9 areas. The first step is a survey that folks in court and county government would take, which would help them and us, but principally them, figure out if the conditions are right for them to undertake a performance improvement project. And these conditions are well established in the literature as those things that are essential if you're going to have a successful experience. So what we're asking them to do is tell us whether, when I say them, I'm referring not only to judges and court staff here, but to county folks. Tell us whether the timing is right, whether there's stability in the leadership within key positions in the courts and county government, and a shared interest and a willingness to assess how they're doing and make changes if changes are warranted, and a commitment, particularly on the part of the county, to reallocating resources if that's something that's necessary. Now, what we've said to our pilot sites, as we've talked through this, the way we're going to use this survey, is if there's not agreement about on all of those things, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to pursue becoming a jurisdiction of excellence. It might mean that the road to getting there is a little longer, and maybe not as, the line isn't as straight. But we've got real good feedback from the judges and the others that have looked at it, and we're confident that that piece of this is shaping up pretty well. The other thing that we're doing is we've asked our pilot sites to consider these 9 areas and the descriptions that we've used to define broadly what excellence in governance is about, in case flow management and data-driven management and the other areas that we've talked about. And we've gotten good feedback on that. The language that we're using, the concepts as we're expressing them are meeting with approval at the local end. Where it gets tricky and where we're spending our time right now is in fine-tuning these specific indicators of what it means to be excellent in any one of these 9 areas. And it's not surprising that that's where a lot of the work needs to be done, because what we have now is a statement of, say, 8 or 10 things within each category, which are not in every case measurable. And this is important because the model assumes, for example, that if Judge Jenkins in Travis County wants to pursue excellence in case flow management, he would look at these indicators, and we want to make sure that if he's not able to document that he is achieving every one of those, then the performance improvement plan that he'll develop will be based on getting better in each of those 10 areas. Then, of course, on the back end, after he's developed his plan and gotten whatever help he needs to get there, on the back end, OCA will come in and take a look at it, and we'll need to verify or certify that he's actually done that his court has actually done that. And so that's where we're spending our time right now. And so we've shared those indicators with folks at our pilot sites and asked them to really press on them and to tell us whether they think in those statements that we're hitting the target. And the bottom line is, are we in agreement that these are things that if we have a jurisdiction that says, yep, we can check that we've done everything in each of these areas, that really constitutes excellence. And so that's where we are in the process right now. The good news is, on a broad level, with regard to the feedback we're getting, is, as I've mentioned in this setting before, this is a new model. It's a test model. It's a pilot concept. We're hoping that setting it up as an incentive model where a jurisdiction that achieves excellence gets the designation from the Judicial Council, that's something that will mean something to people. And the feedback we're getting is that it will. The second thing is, this is to the point I brought up a few minutes ago that Bob Wessels pointed out to us. What this does is it gives courts a really valuable way to engage with their peers and their colleagues in the county to be able to talk about what their needs are, why they need the things they're asking the county for, and to be able to reveal to the county that they're being good stewards of the resources they're getting. I talked about how the indicators need some work, and on a special note, we've talked at several council meetings where we talked about this project. Senator Zaffirini, you've brought up the concerns that not only you, but I think others have, and I'm looking at my colleague Angela here, about data quality. We want to be sure that we don't inadvertently designate a jurisdiction as being a center of excellence, only to find out down the road that they're not timely in their reporting of all of the required reporting they're supposed to be doing to us, or there are major concerns about its quality and reliability. Turns out that all of our pilot sites are not only in full compliance, but these are jurisdictions, perhaps not surprisingly because they volunteered to be pilots, they do a really good job with this. But we've asked them about it and said, well, what do you think about this? What's your thought about whether this issue should be a bar or a barrier moving forward. And what we've heard from them is that a couple of things. One, there may be reasons outside of the court's control why they can't be in full compliance. They've done a transition from one case management system to the next, and they're still cleaning that up. The other thing that was brought up is that, you may have a jurisdiction that could be excellent, but for its reporting issues. And if we can help them address the reporting issues, then we really have a jurisdiction that we want to recognize. So right now, our thinking is that we want to incorporate those elements of data reporting, reliability, and quality into our data-driven management area. That doesn't solve all of our problems, but right now that's what we're working on. Within the division, within the agency, we've got parallel activities that are going on to be able to provide clerks with better and more targeted training about how to address the reporting deficiencies. It's a big issue, and we put it right out there in front of our pilot sites, and we're getting some good feedback on that. So our next steps will be, between now and the next time we meet, is to get the specific feedback on these specific performance criteria that we've asked our pilot sites to look at, so we can make sure, two things, that they are in every case, that they're actionable and measurable, and maybe most importantly, that we're hitting the target, and that there can be consensus, something we'll bring back to the council, that if a court says they can do all of the 10 things in the given area, is that what we consider to be excellent? So there's still some work to be done there, but we're very grateful for the accessibility and the interest that we've had from our pilot sites.
Questions of Scott? Yes, Senator Zachary.
Thank you. Did you address the issue of whether a court could be deemed a center of excellence regarding one criterion, but not all criteria, and how we could differentiate those courts that reach standards of excellence for each criterion?
Yes. Want to make sure I understand the question. Within each performance area, the indicators will be, of course, different. We've got some high achievers in our pilot sites here. They're contemplating that when we go live with this, they will want to do more than one, and at least in one case, this particular jurisdiction wants to try to do all of them. That would be a lot of work. What we're prepared for is to make our allocation of our services available under the assumption that it's going to be sort of one area at a time. So that's the model as we're setting it up. So, for example, we would imagine that, let's keep our fingers crossed and be hopeful here, 12 or 18 months from now, we're coming to the council with a recommendation that a particular jurisdiction be recognized as a center of excellence in one or two areas. I think that's how the rollout will likely be.
I still would like to see them differentiated if they are excellent in all of the areas, and some may be.
Yes, well.
That should be our goal, it would seem to me.
Yes, it is.
It's aspirational, but
yes,
it's doable.
It is doable, and we've been really encouraged by the enthusiasm of the pilot sites. One of the things we talked to David about early on when we were just brainstorming about this was the possibility of a distinction above a center of excellence as a top Texas court, a jurisdiction that is able to demonstrate excellence in all of these areas. The other thing we like about this model, I think, and one of the things that may make it of ongoing interest and utility to the council, is that right now we've got these 9 areas, but there's nothing keeping the council from adding to it. So, for example, in the area of security and emergency preparedness, or in the area of guardianship, it could be that the council would like to see that be a recognized area of excellence, and we build up the criteria to support that. And it also may be the case that some of the categories that we're floating right now are just turn out not to be quite as relevant or useful or as engageable as some of the others. So, in any event, happy so far with the response, and we're pressing ahead.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Scott. That's a great report. We'll keep you up there for the next item, the price of justice grant activities and the National Task Force on fines, fees, and bail practices.
Great, thank you, Chief. These two things are related. We'll just start with the price of justice grant. Back in early 2016, the Department of Justice put out a call for proposals for what they call their Price of Justice project. They were going to make funding available up to $500,000 to 5 jurisdictions that wanted to propose a project that would address areas in the issues in the area of fines and fees reform, collections reform, and related issues. Texas was one of the states, one of 5 states selected as a grantee. As I mentioned, it's a $500,000 grant that will span a 3-year period. The Research and Court Services Division is acting as, at least on paper, perhaps in other ways, as sort of the lead entity on this. We're working very closely with our colleagues in the IT department on the project for the following reason. Our goal with the project is to do 3 things. We want to develop an online, data-driven, empirically based ability to pay tool that judges and others can use to make determinations in a timely and a full way about who's able to pay their legal financial obligations. The other thing we want to be able to do is develop a technology tool, maybe in the form of an app for a phone, that would connect people who are unable to pay with those community alternatives that are able to provide them with the ability to satisfy their legal financial obligation in some other way. The other thing we're doing is developing curriculum that will be used to train judges and others on the use of the 2 tools, and also piggybacking on the work that our judicial training partners in the state are doing, just talking about best practices in collections generally. We've got a number of partners on this project, starting at the federal level, obviously with the Department of Justice, and one of the grantees on the Price of Justice project is the New York-based Center for Court Innovation, and what CCI is doing is working with all of the grantee states and documenting what their projects are about, documenting, because the real idea here is to take the work that's being done in the 5 states and using us as a laboratory and using the methods we use and the tools we develop and share them more broadly with jurisdictions around the country. And CCI is sort of cohering all of those efforts, and so we're working with them. We're also in regular contact with representatives from the other states. It's California, Missouri, Washington State, Texas, and
Louisiana.
All of the states are doing something similar to what we're doing, and so we're in contact with them, technology piece and the training piece. And then finally, we put together an advisory committee of municipal court judges, some people from city government and county government, members of the advocacy community, to work with us to make sure as we're developing these tools, that we're getting the specs right and we're getting the benefit of all of the work that they've done. And included in that partnership is people from our judicial training centers around the state. And so much more to come on that. We're just in the early stages of that project. Happy to answer any questions on that.
Questions on that? The National Task Force is supposed to report more fully at the Council of Chief Justice's July-August meeting, but they're nearing, I think, finished product. Scott's working on that too, and we've been assembling principles to guide jurisdictions in trying to work through their own issues regarding fees and fines and costs in these small cases. But I think we've been underway a year and a half, Scott, and it really is a very intractable problem. It's the same kinds of issues throughout the country. Every state has them. So I'm hopeful that this will really make some progress on this.
Good. Just a few words on the task force. If you'd like, I can run through them fairly quickly. Since this is a major project. Go to the next slide here if we could, Meredith. Yeah, thank you. This is, the Chief talked about the National Task Force on Fines, Fees, and Bail Practices. This is a joint task force by the Conference of headed up by the Conference of Chief Justices and the Conference of State Court Administrators. And I just wanted to do a couple things this morning, talk about the background and context of the task force, how it's gone about its work, and then very quickly, but maybe most importantly, what the deliverables are that it's generated in this area. The chief mentioned the task force has been about this work for a little over a year, and I think for most people in the room, you wouldn't be surprised to learn that not the only, but certainly one of the key pressure points or points of reference here was the report in Ferguson. And the contents of that report, about 20% of this 105-page report on I think most people have seen it, relate to courts and court practices that were found to be procedurally deficient in ways that really matter. And to a large degree, these are ways that courts have some control over. The report makes clear that generating revenue in Ferguson was what county government, along with court partners, was all about, to the detriment and at sacrificing important public safety concerns, but not just public safety concerns. The report and much of the media surrounding it also made it clear that the practices that were being put in place by law enforcement and courts were having a disparate impact on members of the African American community. Lots of commentary and reports have spun from this. Some predated this. This is not a new problem, but the events in Ferguson certainly gave it a profile and a level of concern that it didn't have previously. The reform challenges in this area, particularly for courts, are, to those of you in the room, are not surprising. We've got, in Texas and elsewhere, and these comments that I'll make about this are from a national perspective, not so much about Texas, but they reflect a sort of messy reality and a complex reality as it relates to how courts are funded. And so the way forward involves trying to untangle that, or at least make the manner in which courts are funded and the degree to which, particularly at the municipal level, courts may be involved in generating revenue for city government, make that more transparent, and to generally just raise the level of accountability. Let's go to the next slide if we could. This is a survey that was done by the work group of the task force that Chief Justice Hecht is co-chairing of state contacts in all of the states. And Chief, I think there were about 24 or so states that responded, 22 states that responded. And just in terms of the landscape of the way courts are organized and administered, the Chief can speak to these more specifically than I can, but I don't think I was alone in looking at the survey results in really not fully understanding just how unusual the state of affairs can be with regard to how courts are set up, what authority exists or doesn't exist with regard to how they're overseen and held and held accountable and just generally supported. There's no shortage of authority at the local level with regard to how to create and disband local courts, but that authority isn't always clear about who's in charge and what the general expectations are. And even though it may not always be the case, we have, second bullet here, courts that are in some cases regarded explicitly as being revenue generators for local government. There are open constitutional questions about whether we have the way we have municipal courts set up violates separation of powers or not, but just on the face of it, in some jurisdictions, some problems are suggestible. We have court staff who may be reporting directly to members of the executive branch. Judges in municipal court in many jurisdictions are appointed by local government, and so you've got a chain of command and accountability relationships that run in ways that we're not accustomed to in other areas of the branch. Some, but not all, courts at the municipal level are courts of record. We know that that's certainly true here in Texas. With regard to collecting data about court activity at the local level, we know, and this is true at all levels of court in Texas, jurisdictions use different case management systems, and so it's very difficult to not only quantify activity, but to be able to make comparisons within a state or certainly across jurisdictions. The sources of legal financial obligations are many. They can arise at the county level, the municipal level, at the state level, and there are lots of jurisdictions that just don't have an accurate or an up-to-date compendium of what's out there. And then finally, the manner in which collections practices are managed can vary greatly. The use of third-party collectors and the arrangements, contractual and otherwise, that are in place to govern that can also vary significantly. We'll go to the next slide. Some of you may, I know folks in the room generally are familiar with the work of the National Center for State Courts. For the last 5 or 6 years, they've been doing consistent polling of the public on how they feel about the courts, and this is just a snapshot. This information is very, very helpful and has been very useful, I think, to the task force and folks who have been speaking about its work. You can read for yourself how people were feeling in 2015 and 2016. The news is mixed. I've been somewhat selective here in pulling out these points because they're very helpful in talking about the context of the task force's work. But there is good news, and not just a little, there's more than a little, but I just want to highlight in both 15 and 16, people who identified as having recent experience with trial courts, in both years felt as though procedural fairness is a strength or a hallmark of the court system. And that's important because, for a couple of reasons. One, because courts have responsibility for that. And what's being measured here with regard to procedural fairness is whether people who come before the court feel like they're being listened to, whether they have time to make their case heard, whether the judge is explaining to them what has to happen next in their case. So notwithstanding these concerns that the voting public has about how state courts are doing, people who use the court are telling us that they think generally that we're employing a fair process. This is not Texas-specific information, but it's certainly helpful to have as a point of reference. The next slide, just very quickly on the right, it shows the groups that are associated as part of the leadership of the task force. This was announced in February 2016. Next slide shows the work groups that have been created, and it's the work groups, each one chaired by, with the exception of the last one, each one chaired by a state, a chief justice and a state court administrator from different states. Chief Justice Hecht is co-chair of the Transparency, Governance, and Structural Reform Work Group. That's where a lot of the heavy lifting is done, where a lot of the analytical work is being done. And then just very quickly, I want to talk about the Resource Center because this is where all of that work and other work is being collected. So we go to the next slide. It was just a couple of weeks ago, February 3rd, about a year after the announcement of the creation of the task force, that we announced that we've got some materials available. The task force has been very lucky. This has received a fair amount of press at the national level and some press at the local level. We'll use this as an opportunity to share with you what we've got going on here from the task force. So we go to the next slide. This is the web page on the National Center for State Courts website. So I've chopped it up a little bit here. The stuff on the right is actually below this page. It's real easy to get to. Many people in the room are familiar with the NCSC's website, fines, fees, and bail. If you click on that, you'll get here. And these areas on the right are the areas where we've got specific things that are available to the court community. And I just want to highlight a couple of things. So on the next slide, so these are all of the 6 areas where we've got resources. And on the next slide, these are the ones I want to highlight. And then on the next slide, we'll run through these. These things that are in blue and are italicized here are things that I think folks may find the most helpful immediately. The second one being a bench card that anyone who wants it can pull that down from the National Center site. And really what this is a step-by-step guide for judges on how to make sure that the provisions in Bearden versus Georgia, which require that the court assess a defendant's ability to pay before imprisoning them as a result of non-payment, and make sure that that non-payment was not willful. That's there. This went through an extensive vetting process by the task force. Lots of people laid eyes on it, and it's available for anyone who may want to use it. There's also some other things here that may be less applicable in the immediate term to those of us here in Texas, but they're all there, and we can certainly push out a shortcut to this material by email if anyone would like. The Chief mentioned a few minutes ago that there are principles that are coming here, and probably within the next 30 days or so. And these will be important as a way of communicating just how important the set of procedural, legal issues are within this area, and providing guidance to county government, our partners in state government, and of course to judges about how to revise or change their practices to make sure they're consistent with what we know about how this work needs to be done. If we go to the next slide, I think everyone in the room knows that David, in his capacity as administrative director, is a member of COSCA. That's the Conference of State Court Administrators. And COSCA every year issues a policy paper. And over the last couple of years, they've issued papers that have dealt with issues that are related to the work of the task force and that deal with generally the area of collections and fines, fees, and bail practices. What's really great about these papers is they run about, 11, 12 pages, 13 pages. David has authored one and is on the COSCA committee that oversees these. They've got very, very clear recommendations that are actionable in legislatures, in state courts at the state court level, and at the local level. And they're particularly helpful for those of us who have to talk about these issues as just providing a framework. And so these are very valuable, and the task force has found them to be very helpful. If we go to the next slide, there's abundant information on the website about things that are happening in the states according to these categories. And if we flip ahead, this is a tool that we're really happy about. So anyone who's interested from anywhere in what's happening in the area of reform in this area can hover over any of these states and see what's happening in any of these categories. And so the state court administrator in every state was asked last summer to provide National Center for State Court staff with reports or documents or links to all of the things that are here at the top of the slide. This is expected to be a dynamic and a growing resource. Where the National Center is monitoring traffic here, and so they'll be able to tell if there's any particular area that folks are particularly interested in, and that will help drive sort of second generation work in the development of resources. And then finally, I just want to mention grant-funded national initiatives, and I highlight this because these are two projects here which are being funded by the Arnold Foundation, a Texas foundation that OCA is peripherally involved in. The Brennan Center for Justice and the Texas Public Policy Foundation has gotten money from the Arnold Foundation to take a look in several states. I think it might be somewhere in the neighborhood of half a dozen states. Texas is one of them. And what the break-even point is. So taking a look at, in an individual case, for example, what's the amount of outstanding debt collected, and what's the amount we're spending on trying to collect it, and documenting what that break-even point is. In some states, there's a rough idea of where that line is, but in most states there isn't. In Texas, we're fortunate because we've got good data. And so the group at the Brennan Center and the Public Policy Foundation have been working with us and taking a look, using us as a resource and taking a look at some of our data. And then Dr. Alexis Harris, who's been a leading author and researcher in this area generally, is leading a team of university-based researchers around the country, one of whom is here at the University of Texas, putting together research, state-specific research on the legal history and legal traditions with regard to how we came to this place of having this such a broad menu and array of court costs, fines, and fees, and what the practices are on the collection slide. And the last slide here has to do with a tool that's been, the very last slide here from the National Center for State Courts. And this is important because there is an immediate application of this tool. The National Center for State Courts is heavily involved in the area of performance measurement and performance management for trial courts. We've leaned heavily on them in informing our framing up of our Centers of Excellence project. They've got 10 measures altogether. Measure 7 deals with collections issues. And up until a week ago, all we had was the original measure. And that original measure was designed to, was very crude, and it was designed to help jurisdictions calculate what, as a percentage of what was imposed, was being collected. And that's been built out, and this whole set of three tools now under this Measure 7 is going to be looking at a wider range of practices which reflect the current thinking and some of the subtleties and nuances associated with this work that I think as a court community broadly we're just sort of really tuning into and really embracing. Any questions on the task force? We ran through some of that quickly, but
Questions? Great report, Scott. Scott's putting all this together for the National Task Force, so do a lot of work on this.
with help, as you say, yes.
Next is a report on the collection improvement programs from Amanda Stiles, OCA Court Services.
Good morning, Chief, members. I'd like to give just a brief update on the efforts that we're making the collection improvement program technical support along with the legal division and the audit team to really support the rules that you approved back in August that govern the implementation and operation of programs operated by counties and cities to improve the collection of court costs, fines, and fees. And as you may recall, the rules that implemented, really the primary goal was to provide procedures that help defendants comply with the court orders without causing undue hardship to the defendant and their dependents. So our support focuses on training, online resources, and technical assistance. So our training sessions, we're up to about 20 around the state, from El Paso to Tyler to Amarillo to Beaumont. So we've had quite the training circuit the past few months. And then our online resources, that includes sample language for the required notices that go out to the defendants. Training slides, we also have a webinar that was reported for TMCEC. And this is an area where we're really continuing to work to provide sample forms and additional resources such as other webinars and other training materials to really provide easy access to the programs for the resources to help them implement the changes in the rules. And our technical assistance, that also ranges from answering general questions, reviewing forms, talking about the language in their notices, as well as providing on-site visits to really talk through their process and how that's been implemented. So we continue to support the implementation of the amended rules, and I'm really pleased to report that the overriding response we've received is the programs just want to get it right. They want to know what to do, how to do it, and be in compliance with the rules, so that's been really great. And then I'd like to thank Judge Gravel and his staff. They've been immensely helpful in helping us figure out how to help other programs, so thank you, Judge, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Judge, do you want to comment on how things are going?
I would. Chief, I made you the commitment and the rest of this committee that we would be an early onset court. And on October the 1st, 3 months prior to the new rules being in effect, we implemented those in our court system. And with the help of Amanda and the team from OCA, we strive to get it right. There are 4 things, and remember, we're one court of 2,800 courts in Texas, so this is one world view. In our court, in the first 3 months of implementation, we've seen over a 300% increase in payment plans for defendants. In our court, we've seen an increase in indigency hearings for defendants. In our court, we've seen a significant increase in court cases that have been closed because of indigency determination, or defendants, through the additional contacts that have been mandated through the rules, resolve their cases. One point that I did want to bring up, and it was never the intent, certainly of our committee or of this group, but we've actually seen a significant increase in revenue from closed cases. And as a judge, you know, my concern is not the revenue, but it is closing the cases so we can move on down the road. So and for us, a significant increase is 3%, but when you have over $6 million in outstanding uncollected fines and fees, 3% is a pretty good jump. That doesn't include those that have been determined indigent and that have been resolved there. Finally, I wanted to say thank you to Amanda. She leads a really wonderful team, And even as a court who made a commitment for early testing on this, there were a few things that we had to correct, and our team was really gracious and kind in that. I would share statewide, I've been teaching statewide for our Justice Training Center, and surprisingly, for all of the naysayers we had back in August, there is just a wall of silence today, and everyone seems to be making steady progress. And finally, I would share this. In our court, we have one staff member who works full-time in the area of collections. That's her full-time job. She shared with me just this past Friday that she actually hasn't seen her workload increase. She has seen the contacts increase significantly. Our other staff members who take payments or set up payment plans have seen their workload increase. So I think the rules have been helpful, successful, and more importantly, it's been what's best for the folks here in Texas.
Well, when did you start working on these? A year ago?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and Judge Spillane and some others. And then council made interim rules changes, and then the final ones, and Judge Bell went up to Justice Department meeting yearly. Well, when was it?
I believe December, Chief.
Yeah, to talk about these issues. So it seems like we've done a lot of good work here in a fairly short amount of time. And people, nobody likes change until it happens and it's good, and then they wonder why you didn't do it a lot sooner. But it's good that it's having that effect. Yeah.
And Chief, there was one other thing. This is designated for counties that are greater than, remind me here, David.
Greater than 50,000.
50,000. What we've been teaching at our Texas Justice Training Center that it is for counties of greater than 50,000. But what we're finding is that almost all of the counties, regardless of size, are wanting to implement these new rules because they're fair, at least in the justice court sector. So we're really grateful for that folks are being team players.
Great work. We'll move to the annual statistical report. Angela Garcia, who is OCA's Judicial Information Manager, has
Morning,
the
Chief
highlights.
members. I'd like to give you the overview of what's going on in Texas in fiscal year 16. So we're going to start with the workhorses of the system, our municipal and justice courts.
Yay.
The filings have continued to decline. As I last presented, we've had really historic declines in filings in Class C cases. The number declined by 5% from last year. The traffic and parking cases is the lowest number since I have data for, which was 1980. So I really don't know how far back that level goes. And the non-traffic cases are the lowest since 1986. So declines occurred in every category except for parking and local traffic ordinances. But the most significant decline in terms of volume are those state traffic citations, which alone account for 80% of Class C cases.
Just fewer tickets.
Fewer tickets. In the juvenile area, the number of Class C cases involving juveniles or minors has bottomed out almost. It's just incredible. Over the last 5 years, there's been significant declines in all areas. And what I want to point to is the change in the truancy laws that you promoted led to a more than 90% decline in failure to attend cases and 70% in parent contributing to non-attended cases. Those cases have virtually gone away. And in fiscal year 14, there were changes to the laws allowing school police officers to issue citations in schools. So you see the education code violations have really gone down significantly as well. And some of the other declines may be attributable to that as well. We don't know. The number of Class A and Class B misdemeanors has also declined. It fell by 4% from the previous year. And they fall in all case categories except for drug cases. Marijuana and other misdemeanor drug cases are increasing. The number of felony cases, however, has gone up the last couple of years and increased by 2% overall from the previous year. And here too, we see big increases in the drug cases. And drug cases are the biggest share of the felony caseload. They account for 30% of total caseload. So these increases here translate into big volume of cases increasing. The number of family cases has increased.
Before you go to that, Angela, I think a year ago, when we were looking at these numbers and saw the misdemeanors were down, I think Rick Figueroa asked us, was this having was it causing the consequences of that criminal conduct to increase? Or are there more car wrecks? Are there more in the civil courts? Is there uptick in payment of insurance claims or anything like
Yes.
that? Have we been able to find anything on that?
Well, in the last presentation on vehicle-related material, we did see the citations going down, the misdemeanors going down, DWI going down, but the motor vehicle liability cases are just skyrocketing. And that is the biggest area of growth.
It's been interesting to watch. I know Judge Gravel actually used that data at a presentation before the legislature that he made, and then it's been repeated now several times, where what we are seeing is, even though there are fewer tickets, the data from the other side of the coin of the number of crashes and fatalities is actually increasing. And obviously the point of traffic safety is to try to keep people safe, and so you see these declines sort of having the opposite impact of what we're looking at. And so I know the legislature has been keen to it and actually used the presentation that the council received last year in several hearings now to talk about that trend and kind of what they're going to do. It does impact, of course, the civil docket from the perspective of all the car wreck cases that are being filed over on the other side too. So.
And citations are probably down because of just funding?
I think we found several things. Angela, you want to touch on the sort of the key?
So we did find a concentration of scarce resources, the police, being diverted to more serious matters. There's evidence of the DPS border security initiative, where they've taken a lot of the DPS officers and redistributed them to the border. So the citations are out there, but like in Williamson County, they're down significantly. That's an issue. Then there's potential issue of people driving less, younger people not using cars as much, maybe using public transportation. There's a wide variety of potential causes.
And Chief, I just wanted to add that in Dallas County, in justice courts, we had constables who were able to write citations, and now they no longer. Precinct 1, which is the precinct I'm in, my counterpart had the busiest court in Texas, justice court in Texas. And so a lot of that was attributable to the amount of DPS tickets, constable tickets, sheriff tickets. I mean, it used to be, they were either grant funded or there was more funding for them to do a lot of public safety. So I think that's also attributable to probably a decline.
Mm-hmm. That was another factor, was the decline in federal grant funds to the states and localities to write tickets. Those have gone away.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So we're seeing increases in family law cases. They increased by 8% overall from the previous year. Direct your attention to two main areas. The child support cases, which account for nearly 40% of the family law caseload, increased to the highest level in the 6 years for which we have data. And of really particular concern are the child protection cases, which have increased by more than 25% over the last 5 years. The number of new civil cases has turned around. We had years of declines, but over the last 2 years, they've been increasing by 3% overall from the last year. And in terms of the volume of cases, the largest increases from 15 occurred in the debt cases category, which account for 20% of the caseload, and motor vehicle tort, which now accounts for 13% of the overall caseload. It's, I think, the third largest category now. The number of new probate and guardianship filings decreased by 1% from the previous year. And we see the number of new guardianship cases declining, which I think we expect with the changes to the guardianship laws, promoting more alternatives to a guardianship. But while the filings of the new cases have decreased, the number of total cases filed in that category have increased. So those are reopening those cases, their show cause motions, following up, maybe removing a guardian or an attorney. Those continue. Because these cases are open for potentially decades, there is always constant activity. And we've seen the number of active guardianship cases continue to increase because they're established and you're adding each year 2,000, 3,000 more active guardianship dockets. We've also continue to see an increase in mental health cases for involuntary mental health commitments. It rose to an all-time high of nearly 48,000 cases. The sudden spike you see on this graph is because Dallas finally started reporting. They hadn't been. And we didn't find out until the report changed. So while the percentages might be lower in terms of change, the key statistic here are the temporary mental health commitments, which account for 99% of commitments. So a small increase in that means a large increase in cases. The number of new criminal cases filed in 14 courts of appeals declined, and the courts of appeals are now hearing more civil cases since the beginning of when the jurisdiction changed. So they started hearing cases in 1980, criminal cases in 1980. Criminal cases have declined, civil cases are now a little bit more than 50% of their docket. The average time from filing to disposition has declined to the lowest since 1989. So they are doing great work. They're handling those cases as quickly as possible. In the Court of Criminal Appeals, filings also declined slightly in all categories, but the number of opinions issued by the court increased by 64% and was the highest number delivered since 2000. And last but not least, the Supreme Court. Petitions for review and other petitions or writs declined slightly, while the number of regular causes added to the docket increased by 10%. That's a small percentage, but in terms of those cases, those are where the most work goes in. Those are cases that have been granted review for the most part. And the case processing timelines fell to the lowest level since at least 2005, which is when we started collecting data. And that concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the Mental Health Committee. Justice Board.
Thank you. The materials that you received before the meeting contain a report that focuses on the second stage of the Mental Health Committee's activities dating back to our charge in June of last year. And that stage has been to examine and make recommendations regarding establishing a permanent commission, judicially led commission on mental health. And the recommendation from the Mental Health Committee is to move forward with steps towards establishing such a commission. The recommendation is based on information and research that has been reviewed. We received research support from the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute examining what similar commissions and initiatives in 13 other states have done. We also examined existing commissions in Texas. There are several different models and formats. There's really not one size fits all structure for this, but they are there's aspects there that warrant further examination to decide what would be the best structure and the best way to move forward for a judicial commission focused on mental health. The primary driver behind this is the recognition that a permanent commission will be a continuing vehicle to help the justice system in Texas adequately address the many challenges posed by mental health issues, both civilly and criminally. Chief Justice O'Neill had a terrific way of capturing this at our meeting in December. She said that a commission that is of, by, and for the judiciary is a way to help the Texas justice system take a long view and to look at these issues using the harnessing ability of judges to convene, to develop expertise, to help the commission be a repository for expertise in judicial training, and to coordinate among the many, many stakeholders who are concerned and involved with this issue. The steps to implement this recommendation are outlined in the report. The first step would be to explore the creation and funding of an executive director level staff position. This would be the first step to explore a structure, create a working group, identify stakeholders, identify expertise, bring these together so that ultimately a recommendation can be made. It's anticipated it would be made jointly to the Court of Criminal Appeals and to the Texas Supreme Court with a recommendation for structure, membership, and an ability to go forward, focusing on funding, how will it be funded. And again, the first step of this process would be the creation of an executive director. The funding for that particular position could take several different forms. It might be a legislative appropriation, it might be grants, it might be foundations, it could be federal grants. There's a number of options to explore for that. But that really is a recommended first step, and a lot of that focus comes from the experience with the Children's Commission that had a very successful process of building from the bottom up, coming up with the particular focus and structure, and then launching and being very effective since its launch. And so that is the recommendation to the Court of Criminal Appeals, to the Supreme Court, and to this Judicial Council, which is for the Mental Health Committee to move forward towards the creation of a permanent commission following those steps.
Do you envision that it would operate as part of under the authority of the council, or the courts would oversee it, or what's your view of that? Because the Supreme Court oversees the Children's Commission, and they report to us periodically.
I think there's multiple possible ways it could be set up, and that's certainly one possibility. I think initially the thought would be that an executive director position could very appropriately find a home in the Office of Court Administration, and then once the larger process develops, I think it could be decided, does it work best to have it in a structure similar to the Children's Commission? Maybe it's the Indigence Commission, which is a permanent standing committee of this council. There's alternatives to be explored.
Mm-hmm.
Motion?
Sure.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Discussion.
Great idea.
All right, are we ready to vote? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Carries. And so, step by step, how will we do this? We're going to get OCA to look at it, or?
So Chief, I was waiting for this meeting to happen, and we'll reach out to members of the legislature about potential funding for a position, which I think Justice O'Neill was very adamant that the Children's Commission wouldn't have happened without the director position to really sort of help bring the folks together. So we'll reach out and explore the potential funding opportunity there, and then, see kind of where that goes, and then begin to bring together, the convening of the different groups to talk about what this would actually look like. Ultimately, we were trying at the committee meeting, trying to expedite this as quickly as possible, but I think all of us felt like, time of the essence to get this underway. So we'll begin to work on this and continue to work with the committee as we move forward.
Okay. All right, well, the Children's Commission have made an enormous contribution. It's unbelievable. Not to say it's unbelievable, but I guess Justice O'Neill would say it was believable, but I certainly wasn't so sure. But they really just have done a remarkable job by getting all these people who are interested in these issues to donate an enormous amount of time to work on them, and you couldn't begin to pay for all of that. So they've really done a great job. So hope this will do as well. Great. Thank you very much. All right, we'll look forward to seeing progress on that. On a legislative update, OCA's Director of Public Affairs.
Good morning, members. Actually, most of what I was going to cover this morning has already been covered, so I have an easy job, which I'm thankful for. I'm going to cover a couple of key dates and statistics, and then go through the materials that were included in your Judicial Council materials entitled 85th Legislature Texas Judicial Council Bills. So bill filing deadline is in 3 weeks, March 10th. Came up pretty quickly. So far, OCA is tracking 896 bills that could potentially impact the judiciary or the courts. Most of you know that OCA compiles fiscal notes. Last session, we actually did the second most out of any agency behind the comptroller. We did more than 1,200. So far this session, we've had 424 referred to us, and we've completed 168 of those 424. So that number is going to just continue to rise. I know Jim had mentioned to y'all earlier that House committees were named last week, and the judiciary will be going up in front of the House Appropriations Committee, Article 4, next Thursday, and 2 of your recommendations are actually included in OCA's exceptional items. The first was the expansion of the Guardianship Compliance Project, which you heard Jeff talk about, and the second is to have a court security director, and that's part of our exceptional item number 1. We feel like our exceptional items were really well received in the Senate, and we anticipate, hopefully, that we'll have that same reaction in the House. The chief gave a brief legislative update at the beginning of this meeting, and I just want to talk about how his speech has really given significant momentum to y'all's initiatives. Just going through I'm going to talk about each of the bills so far and where they stand. The Elders Committee guardianship recommendations, there's 2 bills related to that. Senate Bill 36, which is the regulation of the guardianship programs, and Senate Bill 667, which is the expansion of the Guardianship Compliance Project, and Senator Zaffarini is sponsoring those. And like Jeff and Senator Zaffarini mentioned, the Senate State Affairs Committee, the entire committee, is sponsoring Senate Bill 667, not 666. So really great outcome. As far as Judicial Compensation Commission recommendations, the chief mentioned that we are working on a formula, and that is in progress. We also have 2 bills that are in draft form, or that are being drafted right now. The first is to increase longevity pay. Currently, judges only qualify for longevity pay after serving for 16 years, and the bill would decrease that to 2 years, and they would get 0.2% of their salary for every year that they served. And the total dollar figure for that bill would be $2.2 million over the biennium. Our second bill that's being drafted related to that would place the Judicial Council, or the Judicial Compensation Commission's recommendations into the introduced budget on both the House and the Senate side. Because right now there's not a mechanism for the Judicial Compensation Commission recommendations to get before the legislature. So both of those are being drafted. We've talked to a couple of members on the House side and on the Senate side, and are hoping to secure sponsors for those pretty quickly. Court cost modifications bill is being drafted. Senator Whitmire has agreed to sponsor that legislation. We've heard a lot about pretrial bail reform this morning. Senator Whitmire and Representative Murr are going to be sponsoring or authoring those, that legislation, and we're anticipating that bill will probably be filed pretty quickly, and there's a couple meetings this week making some tweaks to the version. It's going to go back to the Legislative Council and hopefully be filed soon. Our mental health recommendations, Representative Price, Coleman, and Murr are going to take up those. Those are also in draft form, so we still have 3 weeks to get them filed. And on the Senate side, Senator Zaffarini, Senator Perry, and Senator Huffman. Senator Huffman's bill dealing with jail diversion has actually been filed in Senate Bill 292, and that's not in your materials. I forgot to include that. We've heard a lot about court security. We have that bill has been filed by Senator Zaffarini, Senate Bill 42, and Representative Smithy has filed that. It's House Bill 1487. We have the sensitive data in court documents. That's also in draft form. That bill is actually only going to focus on the Estates and Family Code and repeal the provisions that require Social Security numbers, driver's license, name of minors, and a number of other sensitive data items. We've been in talk with Ledge Council and hoping to see that draft back pretty quickly as well. And we've talked to Representative Smithy's office about carrying that bill. The Timothy Cole Exoneration Review Commission recommendations are actually going to be in an omnibus bill, and that's being drafted. And we've been in talks with Representative Smithy's office about that bill. The jury wheel reconstitution, still talking with members about that bill and hoping to get a draft in quickly on that one. Oaths of office for state judicial appointees. Senator Zaffarini is sponsoring that bill. And then our final is JVCC statute amendments, and Senator Zaffarini is authoring that one in Senate Bill 43. Do you have any questions? That's a lot of information really quickly. But I actually looked to see where the Judicial Council initiatives were at this point last session, and we are in much better shape than we were at this point last session. Have a lot of those in draft form or have been filed. So I think I helped or assist David in getting these initiatives carried out with the legislature, and we've had several meetings, and I know David's over there every single day, and a lot of these initiatives are really well received, and especially after the chief's speech, there's just a lot of momentum for them.
Judge.
Chief, I just wanted to say, I've testified a few times this session. It is, I am deeply appreciative of Senator Zaffarini and Representative Murr and Chairman Smithy, and that they've carried the water for us in the Texas House and the Texas Senate, and I am just deeply grateful that they are there. David's always a great resource witness, but it is amazing when you have a senator with class and elegance. And by the way, this is her birthday week. She's done an amazing job, judges. If you get a chance to watch her online, she is a blessing for our judiciary.
I second that. Thank you.
You move to make her an honorary judge.
I'm an honorary nun. Inauguration, Sister of Mercy.
Questions, Megan? We ought to report one more for the JCIT stuff. Just FYI, but the Judicial Committee on Information Technology is grappling with access to these electronically filed records now that we've given them all electronically filed, which involves a number of issues, including whether it will impact the clerk's revenue, whether issues of privacy, data mining, all sorts of things that are difficult issues. The district and county clerks have become concerned that they really have a full inquiry into all these issues, which of course JCIT intends. Rebecca Simmons, former Justice of the San Antonio Court of Appeals, is chair of that, and so we're working on that. The committee has recommended that judges and lawyers and clerks have access to this information, some of which has been stored by the vendor who runs the system, Tyler Technologies, for the last since the last year or so, a couple of years. But ultimately, we're more hopeful that access will be through the clerk's offices themselves, that it will not impact the revenue, that it will be secure, that actually if the federal PACER system can be trusted as a model, which has been in place for 16 years, it will produce enough revenue to maintain the system throughout the state for forever. As with any change, there's been some anxiety along the way, but I think we can trust that the JCIT and the Office of Court Administration will come up with a project and not put anything out that before we believe that it all is. And there are lots of problems, but the federal system has, they have the same privacy issues over there. They're not exactly the same. They don't have family cases, so they're, it's always a little different. But they have a problem every once in a while, but in 16 years they haven't had a major problem. So I think we're making progress.
Yeah, Chief. Just to kind of give everybody a little history, the legislature actually directed the Supreme Court in the mid-90s to look at this issue. And if you go look at the specific authority of the Judicial Committee on Information Technology, actually says the JCIT is to establish the system and to work with the court to do that. So obviously the vision back then was that this exists, and of course back then that was not possible because we didn't have the records. Last year, 8.5 million documents were electronically filed with the Texas courts. Largest system in the nation for doing so. And of course, the balance has been between trying to ensure transparency of those court documents, which are obviously the most open documents in state government, at the same time having that balance between privacy and access that Chief has talked about. One of the big impetuses for this last year was our judges in our small counties who don't have sophisticated technology systems to look at electronically filed documents. Whenever the mandate happened last June or July, what were they to do? And so the only thing they could have done without the system was to have the clerk print off the documents in every single case, which obviously would be a burden for the counties. And so we set it up for judges last summer, which is the reason why the documents were being held, an unofficial copy of the documents were being held from January of last year. And so judges are the only ones who have access to it right now. As Chief mentioned, the recommendation that has come over from the Technology Committee is that attorneys of record have access to documents in the case where they're the attorney of record, as well as clerks having access to it. I know the court's considering that now. And then The committee is continuing to work on attorneys having broader access to other documents in other cases, similar to the way the PACER system does, as well as the general public at some point. So I'll just give you one example of an issue that the committee is grappling with, and it's dealing with, for instance, family law cases. Of course, right now, state law, you hear we have a bill draft that's in dealing with sensitive data and family law cases. This council made its position known that we don't think that information should be in any document. But right now, state law requires, for instance, a divorce decree that social security numbers, names of children, bank account numbers, all of that be placed in the decree of divorce. Of course, when it's at the courthouse is one thing, but being online is a whole other thing. And so the recommendation right now is that the committee is considering is that you could find out about a divorce case, as far as searching to see where, as I told the committee, this is not true, but where David Slayton's divorce case is. But where the divorce case is, you could actually find it, but you couldn't see any of the documents because of the sensitive nature of those documents. So if you wanted those, you could know where it exists, you could go to the courthouse or whatever. But with regard to some other case types, for instance, business A suing business B, where there's not really any sensitive information and the cases aren't sealed, then obviously that information be made available. So they're grappling through that. It's really almost on a document by document basis, a case by case basis, and the recommendation hopefully at some point will come over to the court where the court can then consider if they need to get public comment about it. The court has been, I know, the Supreme Court actually adopted the rules for sensitive data back in 2014 because they were most concerned about this as well. Trying to keep this information out of court records. But so anyway, we continue to work with the clerks on this issue, and I'm sure you've read about it, heard about it, maybe heard from clerks, but we continue to work with them. And as the chief mentioned, kind of a late breaking development is we've come up with an idea that would allow the goal to be accomplished, which would be a single statewide place to search and a single statewide place to be able to access the documents, but it would actually go into, with agreements from the clerks, just make sure that's clear, go into the individual clerk's offices and pull that document back out of their system and out to the state level to where, and it would just be there for that one-time use. And that way, the clerks are still the ones that are ultimately providing the document. It's just being done through a central portal. Obviously, with over 450 separate district and county clerks, having to search every single county district clerk for a document you're looking for is a basically impossible duty. So this is what this is trying to address. And so we're hopeful that we're working with a couple of counties already who seem interested in that second newer model. Not every county is going to be able to do that, so we're trying to figure out the appropriate balance there. But continue to work with them on this. And the one thing I do want to say, and I think the chief mentioned this, I just want to repeat it again, is that the intent is that all revenue from the sale of the documents, similar to the PACER system, the model being recommended or being considered is 10 cents a page up to $6. That's very similar to the federal PACER system. And then all the revenue from those documents would go to the counties. The state's not trying to make money off this deal. We're trying to make transparency and access available. But it would be a new revenue source for many counties. I know Terry County, where Judge Moore was, they don't have an online system, I don't think. And so it would be a new revenue source for them that they wouldn't have otherwise. And probably most people don't know about the cases that exist in Terry County right now unless they had some way to search for it. So that's the goal, and we continue to work on that as we move forward.
Okay, that's completes the agenda on the reports. And we're going to pass the new item until the next meeting. David wants to give us a report on the Civil Justice Initiative, which the Conference of Chief Justices has concluded, and how we might implement it in some willing jurisdictions here. But that can wait. And we'll go date for that. So, anything else that we should talk about today? Thanks all for coming. Is there a motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
All in favor? We're adjourned.